MEAG and ECG with us today for an explanation on the proposed Walmart Solar Initiative project. And Mr. Chow, will you be speaking first?
No, I believe MEAG will, and Walter will be speaking on behalf of ECG.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Steve Jackson is starting first, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, good. If we can hear from Mr. Jackson, appreciate it.
Okay, one second, please. We need Mr. Deal to unshare his screen so that we can then share the presentation. Can you not just?
We're not admins in this one.
The only one that probably is Ms. Podesta.
Yeah. Because normally I could just share over him.
Right.
What screen is this?
Can we let's just proceed, and hopefully Mr. Deal can get on in a minute. Okay, Mr. Jackson, if you could go ahead.
There you go.
All right, I'll be happy to, and hopefully we'll have the slides here. There we go. Thank you for the opportunity to present this initiative, the MEAG Solar Initiative, which works in conjunction with the ECG initiative on Walmart. If we could go to the next slide, please. If you, just as with all other MEAG Power resource additions, this addition is driven by the participants' interest and their commitments. So as we talk through this discussion, this little diagram just gives you kind of the foundation and how this project will be built, or initiative will be built. The MEAG Power solar participants, as we're terming them, those that are interested in taking this output from the solar facility, would execute a solar power purchase contract with MEAG Power. And in turn, based on the commitments under the solar power purchase contract, MEAG Power would then execute a power purchase agreement with the solar developer for the project. Next page, please. So we will talk about these three agreements in this conversation. We had to step back from our earlier efforts on solar. We were initially working with a supplier on a 150 megawatt project. But after we had polled our participants towards the end of last year, the interest level being around 90 megawatts, that solar developer then determined that they wanted to reprice the project and raise the price. We also identified that their transmission and their connection costs, which would flow back to the participants, increased by approximately 50%. So quickly that project became uneconomic and was not a project that we felt we could offer to their participants. So we took that opportunity to go back out to some of the other suppliers that had bid to us, asked them to refresh their pricing, and we're pleased to report now that we have completed negotiations on the power purchase agreement. The PPA is ready for execution. The project is now 80 megawatts of output, again, a 20-year fixed price, a very competitive price of $25.91 a megawatt hour. And so we've got that agreement ready and in place. Along with that, now the power purchase contract, which we would ask the participants to execute, again, is in complete form, ready for execution. And then it addresses your entitlements to the output of the 80 megawatt project and other specifics as far as your cost commitments. And then, of course, ECG, Walter from Electric Cities, will discuss the Renewable Energy Customer Agreement, which is the third agreement that would provide for Walmart's participation and commitment under this solar initiative. But before I start into the agreements, I wanted to just touch on a couple of operational aspects of the project or initiative. So if we could go to the next slide, please. First off, I wanted to just give you an indication based on the current pricing, how the cost of that resource and that resource energy fits in with the cost of the other MEAG Power resources that are provided on your behalf. So on this graph, it's just a graph of the operating costs, which includes fuel and some other operating and maintenance costs, not the full cost of the operating costs of various MEAG Power resources and how the solar compares to that. The black line is the cost of operating the nuclear facilities, which you see is in the neighborhood of $10 a megawatt hour. The blue line is the natural gas fueled combined cycle plant, again, which operates in the low to mid $20 a megawatt hour range. The yellow line shows the solar energy at the purchase power agreement cost would come in again in the mid $20 range, as I indicated. And then the lines above that, the red line is the Addison simple cycle gas turbine, which is under a purchase power agreement through 2029 for some of the participants. You can see the red line is the cost of that gas-fired facility. The green line is the current cost of the sharer coal resources, and the orange line is the cost of the Wansley coal resources. For those Wansley coal resources will be removed from the MEAG power supply the latter part of 2022 based on the agreements we have in place with the co-owners of that facility to retire those units. So you can see just graphically here, it provides you a view of how that cost under the purchase power agreement, again, which is fixed for 20 years, compares very favorably in the resource stack, as we call it, of the MEAG resources. So if you'll go to the next slide, I just wanted to provide a quick explanation of how the solar resources will look to you in your resource utilization or resource stack. You'll recall each hour MEAG Power schedules, economically schedules resources to serve your need, and you have a specific stack of resources based on your commitment to the MEAG Power resources. So on this slide, I wanted to talk about a participant that is selling resources during the hour. So if you look at the left-hand graphic, you can see that the participant, well, there's two dispatch points here we talk about. The market dispatch point includes any sales that are off the system to entities outside of the 49 participants. The load dispatch point here shown at 50 megawatts indicates where the MEAG Power resources are dispatched to meet the load of all 49 participants. So when we look at your resources for that hour, you would have specific resources that are identified for your needs under that load dispatch level. So as we look at this little graphic, in this case, the participant here has 45 megawatts of load in the hour. And so the way the resources are dispatched, that also provides for 5 megawatts of their resources to be sold to other participants. And that sale is at the market price. Then on top of that, some of their resources are being sold off the system. You can see here, in this case, projected as 10 megawatts based on 3 different levels of sales, or 3 different sales. You can see, based on economically, the SEPA power is always dispatched at the bottom of our resource stack, then their nuclear, the gas, and then the coal on the top of the stack. So when the solar resources are added into the stack, they're not dispatchable. We're not able to control the output. We'll have a projected output for the hour, but because of their we can't dispatch them the way we do the coal and gas. Those would be shown in your resource stack just above the nuclear resources. So what you see occurring in this case is because the additional 3 megawatts of resources, then we would reduce the output of the coal generation, in this case, which was 15 megawatts in the prior graph, to 12 megawatts because those 3 megawatts are displacing the coal resources at the top of the economic stack. So where in the initial scenario, you had 5 megawatts of SEPA, hydro, 30 megawatts of nuclear, 10 megawatts of gas, and 15 megawatts of coal. In this scenario, you would have, again, 5 megawatts of hydro, 30 megawatts of nuclear, 3 megawatts of solar, 10 megawatts of gas, but the coal would be reduced to 12 megawatts. So this resource will come into your stack. It will be part of your supply to your customers in that hour. But as you can see, it would displace other resources in the same load scenario that we can control, either the gas or in this case, coal. So there was some confusion in some of the earlier discussions about whether this solar would be part of your supply or not, and it is included in your supply each hour that would operate. Now, from an economics point of view, if you're involved in the Renewable Energy Customer Agreement or the RECA agreement with Walmart, Walmart provides some financial assurance to address potential impacts of this change in the dispatch as the solar comes into your stack. So in this case, as a selling participant, you'll see in the bottom bullets there, if the market sale of 3 megawatts brings in revenue less than the solar cost, then Walmart is responsible for paying the difference to keep the participant whole. So if you sold that output for less than what the cost of the solar resources are, Walmart's committed to make up the difference. In the case if the market sale of the 3 megawatts brings in revenue greater than the solar cost, then in that case, Walmart receives the difference, less a percentage that's retained by the participant. And Walter would speak more specifically to those numbers. But the idea is that with Walmart's commitments to support the solar, if there is a benefit by selling that output into the market, they receive a share of that benefit along with the participant. So in this manner in particular, the key here is if the market sale revenue is less than the solar cost, Walmart is responsible for that difference. Next slide, please. So in this case, I wanted to just address the same aspects of this agreement based on a participant that was having to purchase to meet their needs in the hour. So in this case, you'll see because a participant is purchasing, there's no sales off the system into the wholesale market. Only the participants need of 50 megawatts. And in this case, their resource stack only supplied 45 megawatts of that need. So in that hour, then they would be purchasing 5 megawatts from other participants in that hour at, again, the market price. So in this case, as you look at the right-hand graphic, you can see the solar, in this case, provides some of those resources that they were purchasing from the market. So in this case, now the participants' needs are 48 megawatts of resources are provided with the addition of the 3 megawatts of solar. And so now they're only purchasing 2 megawatts from the other participants in this case. But again, also the Walmart agreement, they would receive the renewable credits. But also if the market price for the 3 megawatts purchase is less than the cost of the 3 megawatts of solar, then again, Walmart is responsible to pay the difference to keep the participant whole. So if the market price is lower, if it would have been beneficial to the participant to purchase at that market price, Walmart is responsible for paying that difference and keeping the participant whole. Again, in the scenario with the market price higher, greater than the cost of the 3 megawatts of solar, again, Walmart's participation allowing the participant to receive energy at a lower cost in the market. Then Walmart again receives that difference and less a percentage retained by the participants. So I wanted to provide these two slides just so everyone understands that the solar power would come into your resource stack. It would be there to serve your resource, your load in that hour, not only for Walmart, but for other customers. But Walmart's commitment under renewable, under the RECA agreement keeps you whole versus the market so that there are not additional costs that would be passed on to your other customers. So I'm going to pause at this point before I start talking about the contractual agreements to see if there's any questions on these last couple of slides. Okay, hearing none, I'll go on ahead and the next slide, please, and begin talking about the two MEAG power agreements. The first is the power purchase agreement between MEAG Power and the solar developer. The terms of this agreement at a high level would address the development and construction of the facility. Of course, the products and pricing, which I've mentioned two of those products, which is the energy output of the agreement, and of course, the renewable energy credits that are produced. So those are two of the products, but there's others we'll mention. And of course, then also we have the other standard terms that are in a purchase power agreement, such as provisions around operation and maintenance, fault termination.
That's what they gave.
One point that I do want to be clear about,
I don't know what they might have
the way
done.
this agreements are structured, the solar developer is looking through the purchase power agreement to
get all the
for the financial security under this agreement. So these commitments, as that would be termed, then are non-recourse to MEAG Power. There are specific terms in the power purchase contract.
When I was here this morning,
that support the financial security of the project or the initiative of the agreement. I'll speak to those directly. And those are some of the standard security provisions that you see in our power sales contract, such as your full phase Okay, I hope everyone is back on. So I'll pick up from where I left off, and I'm moving to slide number 8. I'll talk about more of the specifics on the power purchase agreement. Yes, thank you. So the term of the power purchase agreement is 20 years. The products are, as I mentioned earlier, the output or the megawatt hours, the environmental attributes, which at this time is the renewable energy credits. In the future, that may include other environmental attributes based on some of the regulatory activities out there, such as zero emissions energy credits. So we've written the agreement to provide you your share of all those attributes that are generated. You do also receive capacity from this facility, although because of its operating nature, not being dispatchable, being subject to weather impacts, other impacts on the output, the capacity rights are limited to 50% of the nameplate. So if you were to take a 5 megawatt share of the project, you would get 2.5 megawatts of credit towards your peak demand needs. And then there may be other ancillary services such as voltage control that could, if become available from the facility in the future, you could get the cost benefit of those. Again, the contract quantity is 80 megawatts, and that's a maximum and a minimum. If we receive requests over the 80 megawatt limit, there are provisions in the power purchase contract to reduce those commitments to 80 megawatts. But also it's important that we receive 80 megawatts of commitments in order to move forward with the project because the contract price is based on that 80 megawatts of output. If we receive less than the 80 megawatts, it doesn't mean that the project is entirely not going to move forward, but we would need to work with the supplier to look at the requested amount and potentially contract repricing and determine how we would move forward with participants at that point. Again, the contract price, $25.91 a megawatt hour, fixed for 20 years. You pay for the energy that you receive. There are no fixed charges, no demand charge, no capacity charge on top of this price. So it's an all-encompassing price that you only pay when you receive the output of the energy from the facility. The product would be delivered into the integrated transmission system or Georgia transmission system, just as your other MEAG power resources are, and therefore it would be any cost to deliver that to your city would be covered by the MEAG power transmission cost, just as it is with your other resources. The commercial operation date is December 31st of 2023. We do have delay damages provisions that would be paid by the seller. If all or part of the 80 megawatts is not available by that date, $50 a megawatt per day. And also we have a provision in here that if the buyer is not able to bring the facility, the seller is not able to bring the facility into service within a year of that commercial operation date, that we have the right to terminate, and they would be responsible for a termination payment in that case. So as far as transmission, the seller pays the cost to interconnect the facility into the transmission grid, and all that cost is covered by the contract price. And then the buyer pays the cost for delivery, as I mentioned earlier. That cost will be included in your MEAG power transmission billings. Next slide, please. So we also have other guarantees in the agreement. The provider will, in the purchase power agreement, provides an expected annual production out of the facility so that we know how to budget that for you and you have an expectation of the production. If they do not achieve 85% of that expected amount in a year, then they're required to compensate you for that missed energy through liquidated damages. They also are providing financial support under the agreement, $3 million of credit support during construction and $4 million during operation. So there are some defaults for the seller that are outlined under this agreement, bankruptcy being one. If they fail to pay liquidated damages or some of the other payments that are due under the agreement, it could be an event of default. And we also have an event of default based on poor performance out of the facility. You can see there that net output during 2 consecutive years is less than 65% of the expected production. And we would have the right to declare the seller in default or require remedies, or if it's necessary to terminate the agreement if it's in our best interest. Default by the participant is also addressed under the purchase power agreement. Failure of a participant to pay is one of those defaults. And as I mentioned earlier, that is non-recourse to MEAG. So what that would result is MEAG Power would immediately pursue the remedies under the power purchase contract for that defaulting participant. And I'll address those specifics more so when we discuss the power purchase contract. So that basically covers the primary provisions of the power purchase agreement between MEAG Power and the developer. I'll pause here and see if there's any.
I read someplace where the obligation with Walmart would be 15 years instead of 20 years. And I fail to understand why is it that it's 20 years with MEAG and then that 15 year creeps in. Could you explain that to me, please?
Well, I'll speak to that, Dr. Adams, and then Walter West may want to add some specifics to that. The 20-year purchase power agreement, the 20-year term provided the best economic output for the participants. When you look at your ability to sign a retail agreement, that can extend up to 20 years. And so we chose the 20-year term of the purchase power agreement to fit into those, to fit those two criteria. In this case, the economics of the agreement were a big driver of that. My understanding, and Walter can speak to this, is Walmart is limited to, by their corporate philosophy or corporate requirements, to only commit to 15 years. So there is a disconnect there. But
Steve, I can address that piece if you like.
Would, unless termination is invoked, would result in Walmart eventually taking the full 20 years of the agreement. But I'll let Walter speak to that more specifically, or we can hold that question until Walter's discussion. However, Walter, you'd like to handle that.
Well, we can hold it. We can hold it if he desires.
Can you guys hear me okay? This is Walter.
Yes.
Yeah, so Mayor, yeah, Steve was right about Walmart's limited to the 15 years. However, when Walmart signs the agreement, and Albany, it should Albany sign the agreement as well, in year 15, there is an automatic extension of renewal for 5 more years. Should either party, offer, or should either party terminate prior to 20, or should Walmart terminate prior to 20, there is a early termination fee, but even though the contract is 15 years, there is an automatic provision to extend it another 5 years. And I'll address that in more detail, but Walmart's committing to pay for 20 years of cost when they sign the contract or when the contract is fully executed. And I've got some slides on that in my presentation, Dr. Adams.
Well, Walter?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I'm still a little confused because whenever somebody does something like that, it must be an advantage to one party and a disadvantage to the other. So I don't understand I don't understand the reasoning why Walmart would take that stand if it was not an advantage to them, and maybe a slight disadvantage to the recipients.
Sure, that's a great question. And on a high level, you know, ECG's role in this whole contract with Walmart is to try to cover all the risks there is. So Walmart says we have a position we can't sign more than 15 years. So we've added one provision in to automatically extend 5 more years. At year 15, there's 3 things that can happen. The city, well, there's 3 things that can happen. The first thing would be it just continues 5 more years as the contract is designed. The city can also terminate the contract as well. So at year 15, if you like and want to continue with receiving that power and not providing it to Walmart, you can terminate. And there's no termination fee to Walmart. If Walmart terminates at year 15 or any other year after year 11, there is financial pain built into the contract for that. So to your point, I agree. They said, we don't plan on terminating. So, but our attorneys want that provision in the agreement. And we said, okay, if you have to have that provision in the agreement and you're not planning on it, we will make it painful for you to terminate. And we've got some slides on that. So Dr. Adams, does that help, or do I need to provide more information?
Well, now, has anybody looked into the life cycle of Walmart remaining in cities? Does that exceed 15 years, or is that less than 15 years, or is there any evidence that the life cycle of a Walmart approaches 20 years?
Good question. So regardless, so I guess point number 1 is this contract is backed by Walmart corporate. The corporate entity, there's no subsidiary. This is dealing and being signed directly by Walmart. Should one of those facilities close, should your facility close, that is immaterial to this contract. They are still obligated to pay this contract. You will have a choice if they want to, if you agree that maybe you can allocate this to another city, you can do that if you agree to it. But they're obligated to pay this contract for 20 years, regardless of whether they have a store open in Albany or not.
Okay, then I think I understand it better now. Thank you for that explanation.
But very good questions, Dr. Adams. Thank you for those questions.
Okay, if we could move to the next slide now, I'll speak to the power purchase contract. It would be slide 10. And that, of course, is the agreement between MEAG Power and the participant. So this agreement addresses your entitlement share to the products, as we mentioned earlier. And also, as I mentioned, we'll talk about this formula for adjusting the entitlement share in the case of...
And before we go further, can I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
This is Steve Carter. Can we go back to the previous slide for just a moment?
Yes.
For the seller default, if first of all, that 65% seemed to be a pretty low threshold, but if the seller does default, what does that do for our contract with Walmart? What's our obligation to Walmart at that point?
I'll take that question. So these contracts are tied together. So if something happens to the agreement between you and MEAG on the power, that passes through to Walmart. So if there's no kilowatt hours coming out of that solar facility, you're not obligated to provide that to Walmart. And on the other hand, if there's additional costs somehow that are included in this, those costs are passed through. So we've tied these contracts together to Walmart to pass through those costs. And if there's no obligation to provide, should something happen to the agreement that provides power to Albany.
So even though the contract with the seller is with MEAG and contract with Walmart is with the city, they're still tied together so that if something happened on that very front end, it passes through to the very end.
But to be clear, I was only speaking to the agreement between MEAG and Albany that passes through. MEAG would need to answer that question between the PPA provider and MEAG and you.
Right. I need to understand how the whole thing ties together, not a portion in the middle, because, ultimately the seller is the one providing the solar energy at this point, and the city don't really have a relationship with the seller. So if the seller defaults for some reason, where does that leave the city?
That would be a Steve Jackson or Pete Degnan question. And I'll pick up the answer from Albany to the Walmart side.
Hey, could you speak specifically if the seller defaults under the purchase power agreement and the contract is terminated, how that impacts the participant power purchase contract? Oh, you're muted, Pete.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. The contract between the city and Walmart is basically the RECA agreement and the tariff adopted by the city to implement the RECA agreement. And it will basically work like any other tariff that the city has with respect to its customers. To the extent the city receives the power, it has the power, it's obligated to pass it on to Walmart in accordance with the terms of the tariff that's been approved by the city council. And in accordance with the terms of the RECA agreement that both the city and Walmart have signed. In the event that MEAG cannot deliver the solar energy to the city because the seller, in this case, Peak Development, has defaulted, then the city simply does not have that resource to deliver to the to Walmart. So it would be in the same position as it would be with any other customer of the city in the event that for whatever reason MEAG was unable to deliver a particular resource to the city. So there would really be no separate arrangement vis-a-vis Walmart under the RECA and the tariff with Walmart that exists with respect to the other customers.
All right, so that didn't answer anything.
I think.
Help me out again.
Pete,
So,
I think
Pete, I think the question was if the PPA provider defaults with MEAG, what happens under that arrangement? And I would think, if that condition happens, I'll try to address the RECA arrangement between what happens with Albany and Walmart, given the situation where the PPA provider defaults.
Well,
Mr. Carter, was that your question?
Yeah, I thought it was actually the other question, Walter. I thought the question was really the arrangement, what would happen if the city does not receive the power from MEAG because MEAG has not received it from the developer. What is the city's obligations to Walmart under that circumstance?
That is part of the question, but also part of the question is what's MEAG's obligation to the city?
Okay. This is a not take or pay, but this is a take and pay contractual arrangement. So that if MEAG does not receive the power from the developer, then MEAG does not deliver it to the city. The city has no obligation to pay because it has not received the power. And so there would be no obligation for MEAG to the city other than to pursue the contractual provisions that we have under the agreement with the developer, which are the provisions that Steve's going through now in terms of the damages that the developer would be required to pay. But other than those contractual penalties imposed upon the developer, there's no other obligation on the part of MEAG to deliver anything to the city under this arrangement to the extent that MEAG does not receive anything from the developer.
And Mr. Carter, that same translates into Walmart. If you're not being provided any power from MEAG, then you don't have the obligation to Walmart. So whatever comes out of that unit, and if it's zero, then you don't have any obligations.
Okay, so there's no possibility that the city will be orphaned in the middle of this, somewhere between the buyer or somewhere between Walmart and the seller. I'll say it that way.
That's
we
correct.
Won't be, okay.
That is correct. It is
fine.
Yeah. Thank you for that question.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you for that question. We'll move to slide 11 and talk about the key terms of the power purchase contract. With MEAG and the participants. Again, power purchase contract is 20 years, matched to the term of the power purchase agreement. Through this power purchase contract, you would receive a percentage share or an entitlement share to the products from the PPA, which would be the energy and the renewable credits, the capacity, any other products that are generated by the facility. Just as a reminder, for each megawatt hour that you receive of energy, you receive one renewable energy credit. So the megawatt hours and the renewable energy credits are tied together. So you'll receive one of those for each megawatt hour you receive. So under this agreement, there are a number of payment obligations. And I'll explain why we have structured it in the manner we have. The first payment obligation, which would occur approximately 6 to 9 months before the commercial operation date of the facility, based on receiving test energy from the facility of about 6 months in advance of commercial operation date. As they begin putting panels in, they'll begin generating energy. We are funding an escrow account for the facility for the agreement. And what this does is provide available cash flow to help manage the payments to the developer. And this escrow payment is based on the highest expected month of output from the facility and the following budget year. Generally, what we've seen is that it's really the month of May. So we would bill you for this 1 month of expected energy. It would be put into this escrow account, which serves a number of purposes, which I'll mention. And then each year after that initial payment, we would evaluate the amount of money in that escrow account based on the next year of operation and keep that amount up if needed on an annual basis. So this helps provide cash flow for the project in lieu of creating a working capital account by issuing some debt or taking on a financing, like a credit line for the project. All of those, each of those would create ongoing costs for the participants. And we felt like it made more sense to cash fund this escrow account and avoid those kinds of ongoing costs for the facility or for the initiative. In addition to the cash flow from the escrow account, we'll also bill on a month ahead basis based on the expected budgeted cost for the month. Again, this again just facilitates the cash flow under the project. And this will be consist of two types of costs, solar and MEAG costs. I'll speak to those on the next slide. But both the escrow amount and the month ahead billing help us avoid creating some type of a working capital account. One thing that's a little different in this agreement versus the power sales contracts is the monthly payments do not have a 60-day grace period. So if you do not make a monthly payment under this agreement, then you are in default. There's no 60-day grace period prior to a declaration of default as we have under the power sales contract. So that default would mandate that MEAG Power take immediate action to pursue the remedies under this agreement. And I'll speak to that further on the next couple of slides. So one of the provisions of the agreement that helps address default and limit a participant's default on other participants is the ability to sell the participant's entitlement share of the output of the facility. So if a participant has a megawatt share, they're in default. One of the remedies we would take is to sell that energy into the wholesale market or wholesale market prices, take that revenue to offset the default. And in the case of a long-term default by a participant, MEAG Power has the right to permanently transfer or sell that participant's entitlement to other participants in the initiative. So that would be a solution to help cure a long-term default by a participant. Next slide, please. So just quickly, just to speak to the cost under the power purchase contract. The first component of those costs is the solar cost, and that's really the cost from the purchase power agreement. As Pete mentioned earlier, the primary cost under the agreement is just paying for the energy you receive. There are a few other provisions under the purchase power agreement that could create costs to the participants, although they're expected to be unlikely. For example, if MEAG Power for some reason was unable to receive the output from the facility due to some reason other than a force majeure event, then there are provisions that MEAG Power or a portion of the output, MEAG Power would be required to pay for that energy that was not received, basically being based on our inability to receive it, and which was an unlikely event, but it is addressed in the purchase power agreement. When we look at MEAG costs, there are a few additional MEAG costs that may be associated with this agreement, primarily associated with the power scheduling agreement, the bulk power operations. The primary of those being potential energy imbalances as a result of the output from the solar facility. So for example, if the expected to receive 80 megawatts of output from that facility in an hour, for some reason, a thunderstorm or some other event, we can only receive 65 megawatts, then that creates an imbalance between our load and resources an hour. And under our scheduling agreement with Georgia Power, that could result in a penalty in that hour. If there's a penalty that's incurred under our dispatch policy or MEAG Power dispatch policy, those charges are to be directed back to the resource or the load that causes that imbalance, if it can be identified. So in this case, those would be a potential charge under MEAG Power cost for this project. There are a few other potential costs associated with MEAG's management of the agreement, such as our oversight of the operations of the agreement, management of the contract, some some allocation of authority, administrative, and general costs based on the billing activities, associated with the agreement. So those would be small amount of costs, but there would be other costs that you would incur under the power purchase contract. I do list working capital here. As I mentioned, we do not expect to incur any working capital costs based on the structure of the agreement, but we did want to include it if at some point in the long term it was deemed beneficial to the project to add a working capital account. And also, this could be the case for future agreements that would basically be the same structure as this. So again, we would not expect, we do not plan any working capital costs, but those are addressed in the agreement. Finally, as I mentioned earlier, the advanced billing would require true up. The actual cost incurred, some of those costs would be trued up on a monthly basis, others on an annual basis as part of our year-end settlement process. Next slide, please. So on this slide, I wanted to talk about the financial security that the participants are providing under this agreement. The primary of those is the general obligation, full faith and credit, a taxing power pledge, the same pledge that you provide under the power sales contracts. Again, this is a very strong pledge, allowing MEAG Power to pursue ultimately you raising taxes in order to pay the commitments under this agreement. The key here is this financial assurance is so strong that as the developer looks at and can provide to their potential financing entities this type of security, it helps us in those negotiations and in their negotiations keep the cost of the output of this facility very economic. And so this strong pledge supports a lower cost financing on the developer's side and helps ensure that you're receiving a very economic project. The other provision in this agreement is a step-up provision. Again, something that's in the power sales contracts and most of the power sales contracts. So that in an event of a default, each non-defaulting participant is obligated to pay for a pro rata share of all sums due from the defaulted participants. Now, I'll speak to this term, sums due, but that does not include any interest requirements, up to 25% of your entitlement share. So potentially 1.25% of your, or 25% increase in your billing, your monthly billing, up to a 25% increase in your monthly billing to cover the defaulted amount. So the key about the sums due, we've structured the agreement to limit that amount. First off, the defaulting participant, we would take their funds that are available in the escrow account, use those funds to offset any defaulted amounts. As I mentioned earlier, the energy from their share of the facility would be sold in the market. Again, and those revenues used to offset the defaulted amounts. So those two provisions would go a long way to reduce the sums due under from the defaulted participant. And you look at the $25.91 a megawatt hour, very competitive price when you look at current market prices. So there's a strong possibility that the market revenue would cover all of the costs. But any remaining amount after the energy is sold, after the funds from the account are drawn, would be subject to this step-up provision. So that's an effort to minimize that impact to you, and also the 25% limit minimizes the impact to you as well. I do keep in mind, MEAG Power has never had to invoke a step-up provision under our agreements. We would not expect that to be the case here. Again, this is a strong vision that the participants are providing to the solar developer and their financer and their financing entity. Again, supporting a economic financing at a low cost under the purchase power agreement.
Steve,
Please.
Steve,
Yes, Dr. Adams.
question. I'm reminded of the glorious times we had from MEAG concerning the deregulation issue, and all our cities benefited from the funds that we received. Now, what I am concerned about in this situation, if I'm hearing you correctly, under this, go back to the previous slide, please. Under this step-up provision, am I to that all of the MEAG cities, is it 49 cities? However the number is, but if
it would be the cities that commit under this agreement. But right now, I think the number is about 26. So
okay,
it would be the cities that choose to voluntarily participate.
Okay, so it's only about 46 cities that's involved in this effort.
Yes.
Okay, so my question is this: all of these cities are not managed equally. So my question is, if one of the municipalities, or let's say Albany, gets into trouble, and do we have any way? Does MEAG have any way of monitoring or following or supporting that particular municipality to make sure that maybe they don't go into the default, so it would cost other cities, other participants, any financial pain? Are you all able to step in and give advice, directions? Or do you have a monitoring system to pick up on the fact that, say, Albany might be getting into trouble and we need to send somebody down to just kind of talk to them? Am I making sense?
Mayor, I can jump in. This is Walter. You know, we ECG helps most of the cities with their...
I can't hear you, Walter. Please, let's see. Can I turn this?
How about now?
Let me see. Can I turn my volume? Go ahead. Let's see.
How about now? Is that better?
Go ahead.
Okay. Hopefully this is better. So, Cho Wynn's group, with ECG, we do work with most of the members on helping them with what we call a cost of service study, which looks at their total cost and what their rates look like. So we assist with that, but there's, you know, we can't mandate that. So from the ECG side, that's what we offer.
Okay.
Yeah, and Mayor Adams, and maybe Pete could speak to this more directly. I don't believe we have any specific provisions under our power sales contract that would allow us to direct any participant, how they manage their facilities, their operations. We do, on a monthly basis,
No, I wouldn't.
Bills, we have, we receive financial information from them as part of our annual disclosure information.
Right.
So we have information on the participants, but
let me be clear.
I don't believe we have that ability.
Yeah. Let me be clear. I was not suggesting that you step in and manage the situation at all. I guess I was thinking about being able to monitor to see whether or not we were getting into the trouble, and if so, to whether or not friendly advice would be received as to some correctional action. And not to manage or not to intervene. I know you don't have any right to do that, but on the other hand, it concerns me that if one or two of these cities are are not well managed, and then other cities are going to have to pick up the tab, even for that. If we have no way of, say, sharing some advice as to which is the best way to go. And maybe I'm just being a little over paranoid or careful, and that's just me.
Dr. Adams, let me speak to that briefly. It's good to see you again this morning. This is Pete Degnan. Under all of our power sales contracts, except the combined cycle contract, there is a step-up provision. So this is an important issue that that you've raised, that we have been cognizant of for many, many years. Typically, under those contracts, our first sign of distress on the part of a city will often be that they are late in making a payment, one of the monthly bills that we submit to the cities.
Okay.
And under all of the other contracts, there's a 60-day period before that being late ripens into a default. And we immediately get into contact with the cities. If that's our first notice, if we've got an earlier notice, we do this at an earlier point in time. We communicate with the city managers and the governing officials, if that's appropriate, to try and make sure that we understand what the city's financial position is, and to try and work with, to the extent the cities are receptive to advice that we might offer the cities, then we certainly do offer advice on what their options are. So we certainly do that. Under the step-up arrangement, because it does obligate non-defaulting cities to a portion of the responsibility for a defaulting city, we really try and minimize the risk that a non-defaulting city ever has to make any payment under that provision. And the way we do that is to try and structure the contract as we have in this proposed contract, so that we would immediately take the power away from the defaulting city and sell it into the market. And we'd have the proceeds of that sale that we would apply against the outstanding amount owed by the defaulting city. We also are establishing advanced billings. So there should be some amount that we have on hand through the advanced billing mechanism that we would be available to apply against that potential default. And then the other step that we can take, if we have to take, we've never had to take it. We've never had a default by any city in the 45 years of MEAG's existence. We just have never had a monetary default, because at the end of the day, since the city has pledged its full faith and credit taxing power, I think the cities understand that default really isn't an option, because we have the right to go into court and compel the imposition of a special tax to pay the amount in default. So those are all of the remedies built into all of our contracts to try and minimize any obligation on the part of a non-defaulting city. And again, in the 45 years that we've had step-up provisions in our contracts with the cities, we have never had to utilize that provision, because we have never had a default by a city.
Very well done, Mr. Fuller. You have eased my paranoia, and you should be a psychiatrist.
Yeah.
And Dr. Adams, I'll add to that. As Pete mentioned, as soon as some mismanagement and financial situations arise, we will go in pretty quickly, and Cho's group can make recommendations immediately that the city can take that month to help stop the bleeding, which will give us time to work with the city to say, okay, you're spending too much money here, that sort of thing. So it has happened several times, or a few times anyway, and we've been able to come in and help out.
You have answered my question fully, and I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, if we can move on to the next slide, please. I'll quickly wrap up the discussion here on the power purchase contract. I just wanted to quickly step through what the formula is to adjust any oversubscription of the solar facility down to the 80 megawatts of available output. It's a very straightforward formula. So we would take the participants' request and just pro rata reduce that by 80 megawatts over what the total megawatts requested would be, or total megawatt subscription. So we would adjust the participants' maximum megawatt request down, and then that adjusted megawatt subscription level would be divided by 80 megawatts, come up with your entitlement share. This example on the bottom, shows it pretty clearly. If a participant wanted 10 megawatts and there were 92 megawatts of total request, then that participant's subscription of 10 megawatts would be adjusted, as I show in the formula there, by multiplying it by that ratio of 80 to 92, which would result in about an 8.7 megawatt amount instead of 10. And then that at 8.7 megawatts would be divided by 80 megawatts, resulting in a participant having a 10.87% entitlement share in the facilities products, which would be the output, the renewable credits, et cetera. So next slide, please, and I'll wrap up. Wrap up here on the next couple of slides. Slide 15. One thing I did want to point out in the package of information we sent you, of course, is the power purchase contract, which is what we are asking you to consider. Again, this is entirely a voluntary participation. But there are 3 exhibits to that package that I just wanted to mention. The first, Exhibit A, is the solar power purchase agreement. So you do have included in your information the full ready for execution PPA. So, you can you have that information for your review. This is not an agreement. This power purchase agreement is not one that the city would be executing, but it is included for your information. We also have attached an Exhibit B, a form of authorizing resolution. And we would ask that you return an authorizing resolution in a similar form to this one, along with your signed power purchase contract. And then also, we would ask for you to provide an opinion of council as well. And we've provided a form of opinion of council as part of the package and exhibits to the power purchase contract. We're asking for this opinion of council in this case because agreements are not going to be validated as we do with our power sales contracts when we issue debt. So in this case, there's no debt being issued. As I mentioned, there's no fixed cost, strictly agreement where you pay for the energy being provided. So we're asking for an opinion of council to support the validity of the agreement for the developer as they commit to their financing based on power purchase agreement and then the underlying security provisions of the power purchase contract.
Mr.
So
Jack.
on my next slide, just wrapping up, kind of where we're at next steps wise on slide 16, please. So we are in the process. If you are under considering these agreements, we are the next step would be if you choose to participate, your execution of the power purchase contract. And in that agreement, you would nominate your desired amount of megawatts you would request from the facility. That once MEAG Power receives all of those nominations and those executed agreements, then we would determine the entitlement shares for each of the solar participants that are going to be involved in the agreement and include that entitlement share in that power purchase contract. And then based on the commitments of the participants under these agreements, these executed agreements. And we would ask the MEAG Power Board for their approval of the purchase power agreement and our right to execute the purchase power agreement and the purchase power contracts that have been provided by the solar participants. Our target is to take this, make this request of the board at the August 2021 MEAG Power Board meeting. So that's the last that I have on the MEAG Power portion of the presentation. I'll pause and see if there are any questions before we turn it over to Walter for the Electric Cities portion.
Okay, Mr. Jackson,
Yes, sir.
where is this solar farm, or is this, or is the power being purchased from a third-party provider?
So the a third-party provider, excuse me, the entity itself is Pineview Solar. Excuse me. Pineview Solar, and they plan to, excuse me, they plan to build a facility in Wilcox County, and it would be connected to a MEAG Power substation that's in that area. So it will be a new facility, construction by this third-party entity in Wilcox County.
Well, why wouldn't MEAG partner with some of the members, the participants, just to build it? Why do we need to go to a third party?
Well, because of the tax provisions currently that provide the investment tax credits to these solar developers, that investment tax credit provides the opportunity for them to build a facility and provide it to us at a more economic cost than MEAG Power could build it separately using tax-exempt debt.
Well,
so at this point, we find that to be the more economic avenue for the benefit of the participants.
but I mean, wouldn't it have been prudent to discuss the options with the participants?
Well, we did not, and we did a request for proposal, across the industry. We've seen that as the better economic avenue. But so we did not take the opportunity to do an estimate of what a MEAG Power facility would have cost based on, the cost that we've seen through the third-party developers.
How many acres is this farm in Wilcox County going to be?
The solar panels will cover approximately 400 acres.
Okay. All right. And again, did you price out what that farm would cost to construct and install the panels?
We did not. We just used the competitive bidding process under the RFP to come up with the what we thought was the best option for the participants.
My question, Mr. Jackson, is this is an opportunity for MEAG to be a purchaser, to be a provider instead of just a purchaser. Who is Peak Distribution? Is that another entity that's involved in this?
Yeah, each of these solar projects eventually becomes a limited liability company.
Right.
Which Pineview will be that limited liability company. The developer of the project is actually a company called Peak Clean Energy. And so they will be the developer, the constructor, but eventually this, this facility will be owned by the financing entities as a limited liability company.
Okay, so the farm's going to be constructed by Peak Clean Distribution.
Peak Clean Energy is their
energy. How much is it, the project?
I'm sorry?
How much is the project? The construction of the purchase of the property and the construction of the solar farm?
We don't have that information. That's, their details. They have strictly just bid us the purchase power price based on, their underlying economics for the cost of the land, construction, the equipment. So they have just bid us the output price based on their underlying cost.
Well, I mean, I would encourage MEAG to look at what it would cost to construct a 400-acre solar farm and eliminate these LLCs and all these other partners. I think that would be more beneficial to the participants.
Mayor, this is Pete Degnan. I think that's a good point, and we anticipate this is going to be the first of possibly several solar initiatives that we come forward with. But the incentive on this one was the Walmart interest in receiving solar power. And Walmart made it clear that they would commit to this type of an arrangement if we could get the price right. But really for a 20-year term is what they were looking for. And so then that really led us more to the competitive bidding process for a purchase arrangement. Because of course, if we develop the project ourselves, and that certainly may make sense at some point, it would be more than a 20-year, it would be a life of the facility arrangement. And we would not have the ability to allocate those costs to Walmart or any particular industrial customer. And so that's kind of how this particular arrangement came about, is really originated from Walmart. We understood what their commitment would be willing to be. And because of that, it certainly made more sense in our view to go with this type of arrangement. Of the cities that are interested in this proposal, a number of them have made it very clear to us that their interest is predicated solely upon trying to have a good relationship with the Walmart in their area, try and prevent Walmart from seeking other alternatives to acquire solar power, but that their interest did not extend beyond the level of interest that Walmart had. So put the parameters around how we structured this particular project. But again, we fully anticipate there will be more solar coming down the road, more opportunities. And as the city's interest in solar continues to grow, then that will put us in a position to have more flexibility on how we structure an agreement to accommodate those interests.
Okay. Well,
if I may add,
I would like to know what the cost of the project is, and and then what I just think the participants have a right to know that, and I'd ask that we make some inquiry. But with that, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I would just add that when we presented the cost numbers to Walmart, they said that it was the best they had seen in the Southeast. So just kind of a benchmark to say, is it competitive or not? Some of our earlier conversations with Walmart when Steve Jackson addressed some of the negotiations that were going on, and early on, they came back with this was the best price they've seen in the Southeast. So I just point that out as kind of an indication of an entity who's been doing this in all over the country and what they've seen. So whatever that piece of information is worth.
My point, Mr. West, is that this is an opportunity for MEAG to be a producer and not just a purchaser. That's
Okay, well, thank you, Mayor. We understand your comments.
Thank you.
Consideration. So if there are not any other questions for MEAG Power, we'll turn it over to Walter and his part of the presentation.
Thank you, Steve. While they are queuing up our presentation, I was actually going to start with that comment I just finished up with, was that, when this information was communicated with Walmart, they were impressed with the price of the unit cost for the initiative. And so my compliments to MEAG for the work they've done on the solar initiative. There's an ECG presentation. If we could cue that up, that would help with the actual presentation. All right, great. Thank you for that. Next slide, please. Great, thank you. So there's really four documents that are necessary to make this solar initiative happen. Should Albany want to pass along about 1.6 megawatts of this MEAG solar initiative to Walmart. The four documents are, and the term we're using is the Renewable Energy Customer Agreement. So you'll hear the term RECA, R-E-C-A, Renewable Energy Customer Agreement. There's a rate, which we're calling a tariff. There's the RECA agreement. And we'll talk in detail about those first two bullet points. The solar ordinance and an optional general utility service terms are really two agreements or two documents that probably ought to be adopted by the city to help create kind of a belt and suspended approach to this whole document, to this whole initiative. And then I'll give you an update on where we are at Walmart and then the action items necessary. So if we could advance to the next slide, please. Thank you. So not to go over all these details, Walmart's looking for their initiative, they're looking for about 75% of the kilowatt hours that are utilized from the local Albany facility. That equates to about 1.6 megawatts of this solar project. So the output from that 1.6 megawatts of the solar project equals about 75% of the kilowatt hours that's consumed. One unique item about this whole initiative is that those kilowatt hours are not going to actually make it to that facility. What they're getting for this entire initiative are these renewable energy credits. That's the nationally recognized value, the environmental value of solar kilowatt hours or kilowatt hours being created from a solar power unit. So that's what they're getting. Next slide, please. So what's important to understand is, and I pardon the very simplistic slide here, but if you look up top there, you have a facility that you're currently serving kilowatt hours to. There is absolutely nothing that changes about that. We're talking about adding an additional service, which is Walmart receiving renewable energy credits. And for that effort, Albany is receiving about $10,000 in additional margins that are on top of the margins and the monies you make off of the existing facility. So next slide, please. So the visual on that is describing how that works. If you look at the far left-hand side, you'll see the visual of solar panels. Those kilowatt hours that are created, they are actually the solar energy. So that's just the kilowatt hours that you would use in any other kilowatt hours. The solar attribute is the renewable energy credit. All of that is being passed from the solar project to MEAG, and of course from MEAG to Albany. You're getting both of those values, but the energy is actually being credited at the market rate. So that energy is not being provided to Walmart. What's simply passing through, what you're passing through to Walmart is that renewable energy credit. So when Steve Jackson was showing in his earlier slide, that whole dispatch model, that's where this slide comes into play. So again, they're receiving the renewable energy credits and you're paying for all the cost, getting the market value and paying you around paying you $9,600. It may go a little bit more if a certain condition happens. So the next slide, please. So the tariff, again, not to go into all the detail, but it takes all the cost that are in play from MEAG to Albany. That includes what we're calling the PPC cost, which is all the energy. It's the A&G that MEAG assigns to it. Currently there's no transmission service facility, no TSF, but if there was one, for whatever reason, that would be passed through. MEAG is not for profit, so they true up whatever happens on a yearly basis. That cost is passed through. If there are any imbalance fees, that cost is passed through. And there's a provision for any other fees that may come from MEAG related to this project. that would be passed through in the tariff as well. Again, we also add a city fee, which is the margin you would make. That is passed through. Next slide, please. So there's two pieces to the margin. One piece is the $800 per month, because you're between 1 and 2 megawatts, the 1.6 megawatts, you receive $800 a month, which is $9,600 a year, which is pretty close to 10% margin on this project. And there's a variable fee. What happens is they get a credit. Since they're not using the energy, they're getting that credit that Steve showed in his economic dispatch model. If for some reason that credit is more than the cost, you get 5% of that as well. So that would be added on. So again, they're paying for all the cost. They're paying you a city fee. And if the credits go up, which increase, which those credits don't cost you a thing, you get a part of that as well. So next slide, please. Again, another illustration is that you'll continue to send out the existing bill. ECG will create a separate bill which captures all this information we just went through, including the margin, and that will go out as well. So again, this is an indication, since this is an unusual concept, since this isn't something that's typically done with your traditional retail customers, more the big box national customers do something like this. Next slide. So this is what a typical bill would look like. We're showing this on an annual basis rather than a monthly basis, so you can kind of see the cost for a year. But again, this is what a monthly bill would look like. But again, I think it's important to show kind of an annual thing. So if you look just below the very top where it shows the subscription is just below the yellowish bar, the subscription that Walmart would be signing up to is 1,605 kilowatts, or what we call 1.6 megawatts. The energy that comes out of that is right around 4 million kilowatt hours a year. The 3,936,000 and so forth, that's the energy that comes out of that. So if you drop down below that, you'll see where it says MEAG PPA cost. That's the 2.591 cents. So the total dollar cost on that, which Walmart is paying, is the almost $102,000. There is no transmission TSF charge at this point. If there is one, we add it in, but that's zero today because it's for the reasons Steve mentioned earlier. We have budgeted imbalance fees. These are fees where expecting kilowatt hours to come out of the unit and cloud comes over, so it's not exactly what was planned on. So we've scheduled some costs there. MEAG has A&G costs, so we're showing that as well. If we're showing a line for the true up cost, because each year there's going to be the budget's not going to be exact, so whatever costs are there, that's passed through. Then you see the market credit. So since Walmart's not using those kilowatt hours, they're just being credited at the market credit, at the market price. So when you add all those numbers up, you see that it's about, in this case, what we're trying to show is that the market was higher than the actual cost. We don't anticipate that. Walmart's not run any calculations showing that, but should that happen, in addition to the $9,600 that you get for the fixed cost, for the fixed city fee, you would get an additional $326 should that occurrence happen. I'll pause there for any questions. I've got some more slides, but it's this is an unusual concept. It's not something that you typically offer, but this is what the industry offers for large big box customers that are taking this approach. Hearing no questions, I'll advance. Please advance. Okay, so let's go into the agreement itself. So when Walmart signs the agreement, or I should say when everybody signs the agreement, should they all sign it, they're committing to 20 years of all the cost. And as Dr. Adams mentioned earlier, it is a 15-year agreement. So here's how that 15-year agreement is addressed. At year 15, should Albany choose you can terminate the agreement. There will be no termination fee for Walmart because you're deciding to terminate it. But if you like, that's an option that you have. If you don't terminate the agreement, it automatically continues for 5 more years. And Walmart just continues to do that. There is an early termination fee beginning in year 11, and we'll go into that in the next slide, or in a couple of slides. Also, if for some reason if Walmart closes their local store, it has no effect on this. They still are obligated to pay all these costs. They'll still get the renewable energy credits. They can use them wherever they want, but they're still paying for this. Should you want to or agree to have another member pick up this, that's an option for you, but you don't have to do it. Next slide, please. Okay, so should Walmart terminate early? They do have the right to terminate beginning year 11. They have told us over and over again, that is not the plan. And we said, okay, if you are not planning on doing it, but you want that option, it's going to be financially painful for you to do that. So what we've done is, if they want to terminate in year 11, the concern we have is that, you're projecting out costs for 10 years versus projecting out costs for 5 years creates more unknowns. So we are reducing the credit that they get should they terminate earlier. And so you can see if they terminate in year 11, they only get 60% of the credit. If they terminate in year 15 through 20, then they get 85%. So let's go to the next slide. I'm sorry, let's go one more slide too, please. All right, so back up. I was looking for another slide. I think I'll try to address that in another slide. All right, so from a risk standpoint, we have tried to include everything in there possible. There are a couple of items that aren't that's a cost or an obligation you may have, be it small. I want to point out that it's not in the agreement. So the initial escrow payment and those true-up that Steve mentioned earlier, they're not in the agreement. So that's an obligation that's not there. And the step-up provision that Steve and Pete referenced earlier, that's in the PPC, is also, although it's small and unlikely, it's not in there. So I'll pause there for questions or comments. All right, so hearing none. Some of the benefits that are in the agreement, we've already touched on the city fee, we've touched on the fixed and variable fee. The relationship piece obviously is important to Walmart. And then Steve's already touched on the value of the capacity. You are retaining the value of the capacity that is not being passed through. So at Walmart, if you choose to go with the 1.6 megawatts, you're retaining that capacity that we're not showing in the other slides. Next slide, please. I believe we have covered. So the biggest, we covered most everything in here, but the biggest, unknown obviously is the estimates. And we're trying to estimate costs for 10 years. So beginning year 11 through 20, the biggest unknown is the cost estimate. So that's why we've added in the reduction. That's why we've added the provisions to make it painful should they want to terminate. Next slide, please. All right. So here's the projection, and I apologize for all these numbers, but I'll try to touch on some of the bigger numbers here. So the total cost of the project for the 1.6 megawatts, if you look at column A, the very bottom over 10 years, it's about $2 million of cost. If you look over at column D plus column F, they're your fees that are anticipated over those same, when I say fees, I mean the fees that Walmart will pay you, which is right around $200,000. So that's where we're showing the estimated value you get, that margin you get is about 10% of the total project cost. Next slide, please. So we're showing the calculations for the early termination. Again, probably too much detail to go into with this slide. So let's go to the next slide and we'll show you what happens. Okay, so I apologize for this being so busy. There's a lot of numbers that we include, but I'll try to make this very high level. So if you look in the middle of the upper portion, you'll see a column labeled A, where if they decide to terminate at year 11, you'll see where the cost is about just under $1 million. It's $987,000 of remaining cost estimated in this example. The value, so the market credit is about $1.2 million in value. So if you add those two numbers together, you're looking at about $229,000 of value should Walmart terminate under this example in year 11. So there's, again, around $230,000 in value in the project. If you look in the lower left-hand corner, I'm sorry, the lower right-hand corner where you see the termination fee, given this example, if they say, look, we want to terminate in year 11, they will pay you $360,000 to terminate. So you get that in hand. And the anticipated value of everything is around $230,000. So they're essentially paying you $360,000 to take value at $220,000. And I'll pause there again. This goes back to to Dr. Adams' question. You know, if they do terminate, it is designed to be painful to Walmart because they said we don't plan to terminate. So I'll pause there for comment if I've explained that in a way that makes sense. Okay, hearing none. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, there's some other examples of a higher market and a lower market, but regardless of which example we use, the contract makes it financially painful for Walmart to terminate, where you're retaining a big portion of the value and full output and value of the project. Next slide, please. So Walmart has signed the agreement, and we are emailing those out to all the members today. ECG staff is available to answer any questions you may have. As Steve mentioned earlier, what MEAG's trying to get all these documents back in hand by August the 19th for their approval. So we having these executed in place prior to you signing the agreement with MEAG mitigates your risk of this portion that would be available to Walmart. Next slide, please. So the agreements necessary in addition to what Steve was talking about, is the Renewable Energy Credit Agreement, adoption of the tariff, and then there's a solar ordinance and the utility general service terms that are ordinance that are just what we feel like is an additional belts and suspenders coverage to make all these documents fit together. Next slide. And that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay. All right, thank you very much, Steve, and thank you, Walter. Just double check one more time if anybody had any questions. Can you end the slide? Maybe I can see. Okay, I don't guess so. Do we need to let the mayor officially terminate the meeting?
Yep, we can adjourn on his word.
Okay, we just appreciate Mr. West and Mr. Jackson and all the information they provided. We appreciate them being with us, and thank you for answering our questions and providing the details about this project. And with that, I guess we'll adjourn.
Thank you.
You want to have a good weekend.
Thank you, everybody.
All right, guys, thank you for your time.
Thank you.